Hello and welcome to our lecture on PHP arrays. This material, video, audio, and slides are copyright Creative Commons attribution. My name is Charles Severance and I'll be giving you this lecture. So PHP arrays, as I've said in earlier lectures, are just amazing. They are probably the most beloved feature of PHP. They are the thing that, when people learn PHP as their first language and then they go to other languages, they're like, oh, I miss my associative arrays because they're so amazing and so flexible. Python dictionaries are less flexible. Java hash maps are less flexible. They are kind of associative arrays in the general category of associative arrays, but not nearly as flexible and easy to use as the PHP ones. So they have all the benefits of these, but it's like they combine a whole lot of data structures together. They're associative arrays, but they can either be key map to value, and I always like to read this word as map to. That's what I like to read it as, map to. Key map to value, or indexed by numbers. And the numbers do not have to be compact or dense. You can have gaps in the numbers. And we'll talk just a little bit about one example of an array of arrays. So this is just a review from an earlier lecture. If you simply make an array and put two elements in it, it's the 0 element and the 1 element, the 1 element, and then you use the index operator, the square brackets, and stuff sub 1 pulls out effectively the second thing, and away you go. And this array is part of, it's kind of like a function, it's kind of like a constructor and object-oriented sense where we're saying, make me array and initially populate it with these two items in it. And a key value array uses this map to operator. Name maps to Chuck, course maps to instructor. The key is the first one and the value is the second one. And this again says make me an array with two. This is a 2-item array, and with a different. This is not it's a separate item. This is a key to look up that item, and stuff ends up with this array. And then you use the index operator, but then you use the key value to look something up. And so this looks up the thing under the key course, which pulls up PHP-Intro, and that's how that output is produced. You can use the function printr. It does a nice pretty job of printing out PHP arrays, and so you can see the keys and the values, and just all you do is take the whole little array, shove it into printr. It's not very good for end user stuff, but it's good for developers. And so if you look at my code, you'll see me commenting out print R's. They'll be all, oh, look at all the print R's in there, and they're all commented out. But it's quite useful. You can also build an array up. In this case, I'm building up an integer indexed array starting at 0. You make the array. That says make me an empty array with no initial values, and then the variable with empty brackets means at the end. So append to the end. So create a new value in the array. Create a new slot in the array. However many's there, go to the end, add a new one, and stick the value hello in. Go to the end, add a new one, stick the value hello world in, and then we print them out, and you see that the 0 item is hello and the 1 item is world. You can also do the same thing with key value pairs. Start with an empty array, and then say on the left-hand side, use the index operator. And this is effectively creating a key, right? ZA sub name is Chuck, and ZA sub course is PHP-Intro. And so that's a way to create a key value array. You can loop through an array. And here is a 2-item key value array. The for each is the way. It's not the same as a for, which is a counted loop. The for each is a loops through an array or an object, and so stuff is the what we're looping through. As is a keyword, and k loops through the successive values of the keys, and value at the same time in perfect synchronization goes to the successive values of the value. And so when I'm printing these out, key equals name, val equals Chuck. The loop runs twice, and the value pairs are there. Now, again, unlike Python, these you put them in order, and they tend to stay in order, although we'll see in a second how you change them. So that was a quick review of the stuff we've talked about in previous lectures. This just is demonstrating how you can have an array, and inside it doesn't just have to be strings or whatevers. In this situation, we have the string, the outer array has paper that maps to then an inner array, right? And so it is an array that has as each element, it's a 3-element array, 1, 2, 3, a 3-element array, but each of the things that is mapped to in that is itself an array. And so we can look up things in the inner arrays by products subpends. This itself is this array. Product subpends is that array. And then we're doing another lookup in that and looking up in marker. So what comes out is markers. Okay, so that's how we look up an array of array. Now this little pattern is done a lot, and people will use arrays to put all kinds of relatively complex structures. We'll later learn about objects, which is another way of representing this kind of data. But arrays is sort of a simple, extremely flexible, and it can have multiple layers and multiple levels. And it doesn't even have to be as consistent as this. The first thing could be an array. The second thing could be like 12. So the first one's an array, the second one's an integer, and the third one could be like, hello, a string hello. And that would be okay too. Now, your code has to sort of keep track of the shape of these things if they get super complex. So it's often best not to get too complex unless you have a good reason to do so. Another thing about arrays is there's lots of functions that manipulate arrays. We play with them a lot, and you can go look, like everything, on the php.net website to find the manual entry. And so, I'll say something like PHP function to reverse an array, or PHP function to merge two arrays, and then away you go. So those are things that you come to. So here's a few functions that are commonly used in arrays, and we'll look at some of these. Count is a built-in function that says how many items are in the array. So if there's 2, that returns 2. Because you have these, you'll see it as the word mixed in some of the documentation. You can pass an array or a string or an integer to some functions, and in that function you got to decide, did I get an integer, did I get a string? And so there's a whole series of is underscore functions. Is array is true or false depending on whether this is an array or not. And that's really valuable if you want to make it so your first parameter can be different things in a function. Is set. This is a really valuable function, because you get in trouble if you look something up, that's blah 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 that doesn't exist. And so you have to ask if this particular key is set inside that array, and it returns true, and then you can safely remove it. Okay, otherwise you'll get an error. I don't quite know why it has to do that, but it's made a choice that extracting something from an array with the wrong key is an error, but you can check to see if it exists with isSet. So remember that is a really important feature. It's it's very necessary as we start to look at post data, whatever. And there's a whole neat set of sorting things that make it really easy. These arrays tend to remain in whatever order you put them in, and then you can sort them. You can sort them on the values, you can sort them on the keys, or you can sort them on the values without losing the keys. Probably better to see these as example. And if you're making a card game, there's a shuffle, which takes an array and just kind of unsorts it in random order. So it's a randomizer for the entries in an array. So here's a little bit of code that'll demonstrate some of these ideas. So we make ourselves a little bit of an array, and then we throw two entries in it with a key of name and a key of course, much like the ones we produced before. So we'll take a look at the count function, passing in the array that we just made, and that returns us a 2. We can call is underscore array, and that's telling us is the type of this $ZA variable an array or not. And in this case, the answer is yes, it is an array, so that's good. It's going to be true, so it's going to run this code. So this is a bit of code that's actually a common idiom when it comes to both the use of isSet and the ternary operator, right? So the ternary operator, remember, is like this is a question, this is the true part, and this is the false part. And so isSet is a function that takes a key is set, the key is the key string, quote name quote, set in the array ZA, and then returns true or false. So in this case, because name is indeed set, this returns a true in this case, and so it prints out name is set. And so that's how this one comes out. So that prints out there. And if it's ADDR, and neither of these two keys here are ADDR, so that returns false, and then it returns this false bit, and then that's what gets echoed. Okay, and so you'll see the use of this ternary operator a lot with, an is set, yes or no, and then sort of a yes, it's set, yes, that key exists, or no, the key doesn't exist. That's the quickest way to check to see if something exists. Often what you're really doing is you're looking something up, but you do need to check it. Now mentally you might say, how come this doesn't blow up, but somehow is set is special, and that in the Department of Inconsistency, that's an inconsistency for me as a computer scientist. But don't worry, this is okay, but then actually extracting the value when the key doesn't exist is not okay. I can't explain it. It's funky. So here's another one, demonstrating the sort function. So and demonstrating a little bit of the weirdness about the sort function. So this sort function I think of as like the old original sort. And so I'm going to make 3 values, and I'm going to print them out. Now you'll notice that they nicely stay in order. Name, course, and topic are that's the way they were put in, and that's the way they stay. And then you sort it, and then you print it out. And so what it does is it sorts the values. These are the values here. So they get sorted, Chuck, PHP, PHP-Intro, but then the keys are sort of thrown away. I think this sort is mostly for arrays that are not key value. And so, if they were just normal old integer or indexed arrays, sorting it makes perfect sense. But key value arrays, you would not want to use sort to sort a key value array. But luckily, there are other super awesome sorts. So we do the same thing, make an array with 3 entries that's a key value array, and we print it out, and then we do a sort by keys. So that just basically looks through the keys and gets the keys sorted in order. And because it stays that way, so course name CNT, and so these are now in order by that. And then we can take another look and print it by a sort, which I wish they would have called vsort, but maybe there's some other function, because it really looks through the values. Actually, it's looking through those values, and it resorts it based on the values. But what it does with this a sort as compared to the regular sort is it keeps the keys intact. It's moving them around so that they're in order, so the values are in order. And so these two are both of my little favorite guys. One is a sort by keys and the other sort by values without losing keys. And I tend not to use the regular sort unless I really know it's just an array with integer keys, and that's okay. So arrays and strings are connected. Various languages have ways to split a string by spaces or whatever. The function for this in PHP is called explode. It's not called split, it's called explode. And it's all takes as parameters. And the first parameter that you use is the character that you're going to use as your breaking character, which is a space in this case. And then the string to break into pieces. And so that says go look for the spaces, chop this thing into pieces, and then give me back an array, integer indexed array, just like this, where each of the individual pieces is a separate item and the spaces are all gone. Okay, and so that explodes it. There's actually a thing called implode that puts them all back together, putting a separator back in. So now I want to talk a little bit about how we use arrays to access data from HTTP. HTTP, of course, is the Hypertext Transport Protocol. And so back when we first, talking about PHP, the goal of PHP is to write web applications and do all the hard work for you. And so things like parameters that users type into their browsers, into forms, or on URLs. PHP, there's rules about this stuff, and it's pretty complex, and there's a complex specification. But PHP does all the complex work for us. It's really difficult code, and very intricate and very precise and easy to make a mistake, and you wouldn't want to write it. So PHP does all this stuff and sticks these resulting values in global variables for us to play with, and we'll see this in a second. If you were going to write all this protocol stuff yourself, you would have to read lots of documents, and this is RFC 7230. It is 89 pages long, and there are many of these, and you'd have to read them all, and so you literally don't want to do that. So this is what it looks like to deal with all those protocols and format conversions and multi-language stuff. All you know is when you're done, PHP will hand you all of those parameters that come on the command line, that come on the end of the URL, followed by a question mark, x equals 2, ampersand, y equals 14. All of those are handed to us in this array called $_get. It's a global array, and it's all uppercase so that you won't use this array for anything else, but it's pre-populated by PHP. And so in comes our HTML code. We switch to PHP, and we use printr, our array printer, and we see that we have a variable x, key of x mapped to 2, and a key of y mapped to 4. And then we sort of do the same thing with var dump, but basically we have got ourselves a nice associative array that has read all this stuff from the command line, x equals 2, y equals 4. It can be much more complex than that, but we just look at this global array. And you can play with this at this URL. And what you do is you change these parameters. Okay, if you don't put any parameters on, let's clear this. It's right here. Put question mark x equals 2, ampersand, y equals 4. So you have to add that question mark x equals 2, ampersand, y equals 4. And then you play with variables, put different ones on, put different numbers. You switch from to what's called the query string with a question mark, and then you go from parameter to parameter with an ampersand. And then this becomes the key, that becomes the value, key, value. Okay? Okay. So this is the output of the program. Again, the basic idea is that we have these parameters and they end up in this global array. Now, if you really get crazy, and we will increasingly want to do this, and it might not be a bad idea right now to turn on what's called developer mode. Usually, sometimes you have to turn it on, but eventually, sometimes you'll get this turned on by mistake. You will see this bottom half of the screen that gives you some detail. And I have selected here the network tab, and I then hit refresh. I hit the refresh button, and then it shows you the refresh, the URL that's been retrieved by the browser in its request response cycle. And you may not be able to see it, but it's got all this data about the request, including the query string parameters that have been sent. And you can play with these tabs. And so if you flip to the response tab, you actually see here, and it's a little small. Maybe you should get the slides. It's a little small, but you can see sort of the output of the PHP. And you can see the pre-tag and the array, output of the printr, and then the end of it, and all. So that's the HTML that comes out. So this developer mode itself is a good thing to get to know how to use. It's a very great tool, and it greatly helps debugging applications. We won't focus on it too much in this chapter, but we'll play with it even more in future chapters, so you might want to play with it. So here is another application. I call this the guessing game. And you can play this as well by sort of, going to that URL and then putting your guess on. And so you're passing a key of guess and a value of 7. And so you can, for a while, try to guess it. You can put bad stuff in. You could say guess equals Fred. Right? And see what it does for that. And then you can play with it and see what the guess is. And you're going to see what the guess is in just a second. So if you want to stop so you can play with it, go ahead and stop and play with it. But pretty soon we are going to see what the answer is. So here's the code to the guessing game, and that's why you're going to see what the answer is. And so it's, again, an HTML document, right? And so it comes in, and it's got a head, and it's got a title and a body, and it's got a header tag, H1 tag, and a paragraph tag. And all it's just HTML, no PHP. And then, of course, we have the PHP tag to switch into PHP. And this is a multi-branch if using the else if construct we talked about previously. And the first thing we've got to do is we've got to make sure that the guess parameter is actually there. And this is the idiom of if not is set. Is set is a built-in function for arrays. and then $_get index guess. So if that one is not set, then this line executes and it says missing guess parameter. And if that is set, then it does, we grab the guess parameter and check to see if it's 0. Now, what's going to happen here is if you say guess equals Fred, this will be an arithmetic computation here, and it's just going to convert Fred to 0. If you remember, when a PHP operator is trying to convert a string to a number and it gets non-digits, it turns it to 0. And so that's our quick and dirty way to catch things like, you can't really tell if they put in 0 or if they put in Fred, but it's a good way to check for out of range data and bad data all in one thing. And of course, if that is false, if this is false and that's false, then we check to see if it's less than 42. Now the thing to make sure you realize is that this is a string. It's not a number. It is the characters 42 or 200 or whatever. But because this is a operator that's doing arithmetic calculation, it has an implicit conversion from a string to an integer. So this works fine. And if it's not too low, then it checks to see if it's too high. Similar kind of thing where this string is being converted to a number for the greater than calculation. And if all those things are false, then you're right. And so you can look at this code and figure out what the right answer is. Okay? So, but the key to this whole thing is this global $get variable is where these parameters are put, and it is a PHP array with keys and values that reflect the key and the value of the various parameters, and there can be more than one parameter that you put on. Okay? So, in summary, PHP arrays are amazing. They're probably the best associative array implementation in terms of user flexibility and features that you have easy access to. They do things like maintain order. They can be sorted. This is just some of the powerful capabilities. They can have arrays within arrays. Lots of complex, intricate data structures can be placed in arrays. People like them. Things like you can take a string apart and get an array of pieces, and then we can use these super globals like $get. They're also super capitalized to get things like HTTP data. So thank you for listening. See you in the next lecture. Cheers.